Story 1. The Music in the Woods. The air in Waycross, Georgia, was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a heavy blanket that settled over Caleb and Lena Harper's new home. The couple, married 2 years and together for a decade, had moved into the sprawling ranch-style house just 3 weeks ago, drawn by its promise of quiet and space. The property sat on a secluded street, its wide lawn stretching toward a dense patch of woods that seemed to hum with secrets. They'd envisioned a future here, adopting a dog, raising kids, building a life. But tonight, that dream was unraveling, note by eerie note, as a sound from the darkness threatened to consume them. It was just after 11 p.m. when the music started. Caleb was drifting towards sleep, the hum of the air conditioner lulling him into a haze, when a sudden burst of sound jolted him upright. It was tinny, warped, like a record player left spinning in an attic for decades. The melody was bouncy yet sinister, a nursery rhyme twisted into something malevolent. Lena sat up beside him, her eyes wide in the moonlight filtering through the blinds. "What the hell is that?" she whispered, her voice tight with fear. Caleb's heart thudded as he strained to identify the tune. It was familiar, yet wrong, like a memory half remembered. "Sounds old," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "like something from the 40s. He slid out of bed, his bare feet cold against the hardwood, and crept to the window. Peering through the slats, he saw only the dark expanse of their lawn, the swing set they'd bought for future children, standing motionless in the humid air. Beyond the lawn, the woods loomed, their branches clawing at the sky. The music was loud, unmistakable, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "It's in our yard," Lena said, joining him at the window. Her hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the blinds. "Caleb, this isn't right. Who's out there?" He didn't have an answer. Their nearest neighbors were a quarter-mile away, their houses hidden by rows of pines. This wasn't a party gone rogue or a car radio left blaring. The music was deliberate, placed. Caleb grabbed his phone and a flashlight from the nightstand, his mind racing. "Stay here," he said, ignoring the fear in Lena's eyes. "I'll check it out." "Don't," she pleaded, grabbing his arm. "Let's just call the police." But Caleb's stubborn streak flared. This was their home, their fresh start, and he wasn't about to let some prankster ruin it. "I'll be quick," he said, shaking off her grip. He pulled on a pair of boots and headed downstairs, the music growing louder with each step. It was "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf" by Henry Hall, he later learned. But in that moment, it felt like a taunt, a predator's lullaby echoing through the night. The back door creaked as he opened it, the floodlight casting harsh shadows across the lawn. The grass was empty, the air thick with the scent of damp moss. But the music was deafening now, coming not from the yard but from the woods beyond the property line. Caleb's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing gnarled branches and undergrowth that seemed to shift in the shadows. The song played to its end, then stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so thick it felt like a physical weight. He stood frozen, his breath shallow, waiting for something, anything, to explain the noise. A rustle in the bushes made his pulse spike, but it was just a raccoon scurrying away. "Kids," he muttered, trying to convince himself it was a prank, but the woods felt alive, their shadows pulsing with intent. He retreated inside, locking the door behind him, and climbed the stairs to Lena. "Probably just teenagers messing with us," he said, his voice hollow. "New folks in town, you know." Lena's eyes betrayed her doubt. "That song, it wasn't normal, Caleb. Why that song? Why here?" He didn't have an answer. They tried to sleep, but the silence was worse than the music, heavy with the promise of something waiting. The next morning, Caleb scoured the yard for clues, a footprint, a discarded beer can, anything to prove it was just kids. He found nothing, but the woods seemed closer, their branches reaching toward the house like skeletal fingers. The next night, it happened again. They'd barely turned off the bedroom lights when the music started, louder and more insistent. This time it was "Tiptoe Through the Tulips," the falsetto voice of Tiny Tim slicing through the night like a razor. Caleb's stomach churned as he remembered the song from old horror movies, its innocence twisted into something grotesque. Lena clutched his hand, her nails digging into his skin. "This isn't kids," she whispered. "This is wrong." He didn't argue. He went to the window, his breath catching as he spotted something on the lawn. A small, boxy shape glinting in the moonlight. It was an old radio, its antenna bent and rusted, sitting in the grass like it had been placed there deliberately. The music poured from it, unnaturally loud for such a small device. Caleb's mind screamed at him to stay inside, but he couldn't let this go on. He grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and headed downstairs, Lena's protests echoing behind him. The air outside was thick with the scent of pine and decay. The radio's music grew louder as he approached, its eerie notes curling around him like smoke. He reached down to turn it off, his fingers brushing the cold metal. The song cut off mid-note, plunging the yard into silence. He held the radio up triumphantly, shouting to Lena at the window, "Someone's screwing with us!" But then Lena's scream shattered the night. "Caleb, run! There's someone behind you!" His blood turned to ice. He spun around, the flashlight beam sweeping across the tree line. 3 figures stood there, motionless, just beyond the edge of the lawn. They were tall, shrouded in darkness, their faces obscured by hoods or masks. They didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. Caleb's voice caught in his throat as he yelled, "Get the hell off my property!" But the figures didn't flinch. The silence was worse than any threat, heavy with intent. He bolted back to the house, slamming the door and locking it. Lena was already on the phone with the police, her voice shaking as she described the figures. Caleb's hands trembled as he checked every window, every lock, expecting to hear footsteps or the music starting again. The police arrived within 20 minutes, 2 officers with flashlights who listened to their story with grim expressions. Caleb showed them the radio, careful not to touch anything but the handle, and explained about the figures in the woods. The officers searched the tree line, their beams cutting through the darkness, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone. They took the radio as evidence, promising to dust it for prints, but their skepticism was palpable. "Probably just kids," one said, echoing Caleb's earlier excuse. But as they drove away, Caleb and Lena felt no safer. The woods seemed to loom closer, their shadows stretching across the lawn like grasping fingers. The incidents didn't stop. Over the next week, the music returned every night, always a different song, but always old, always eerie. Moonlight Serenade, In the Mood, I'll Be Seeing You. Each one played from a new radio left somewhere on the property. Caleb stopped going outside after the second night, but he couldn't ignore the way the songs seemed to seep into the house, filling their dreams with warped melodies and faceless figures. Lena started sleeping with a knife under her pillow, her eyes hollow with fear. One night, Caleb woke to silence. No music, no rustling, just an oppressive stillness. He checked the window, expecting another radio, but saw something worse. The figures were back, closer this time, standing just at the edge of the lawn. There were 5 now, their silhouettes sharper, their heads tilted as if listening. Caleb's breath hitched as he realized one was holding something. A small, glowing object. Another radio. But this time it wasn't playing music. It was emitting a low, rhythmic hum, like a heartbeat. He didn't tell Lena. She was already on the verge of breaking, talking about selling the house and moving back to the city. Instead, he called the police again. But when they arrived, the figures were gone, and the radio was nowhere to be found. The officers suggested installing cameras, and Caleb did, setting up motion-activated ones around the property. The first night with the cameras, they caught nothing but static and shadows. The second night, the feed went black for exactly 3 minutes, though the timestamp showed no interruption. Desperate, Caleb contacted a local historian, Ruth Carver, hoping for answers about the woods or the house's previous owners. Ruth, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a voice like gravel, paled when he described the music and the figures. "Those woods," she said, her hands trembling as she clutched her coffee mug. "They were part of an old estate back in the 30s. The family that lived there, they disappeared. No bodies, no trace, just gone. People said they heard music at night, old records playing, long after the house was empty." Caleb's stomach dropped. "What happened to them?" Ruth shook her head. "No one knows, but folks avoid those woods. Say they're hungry." That night, Caleb and Lena stayed in a hotel, unable to face another night in the house. But when they returned the next morning, the front door was ajar, and inside, the living room was filled with radios. Dozens of them, all ancient, their dials glowing faintly. They played in unison, a cacophony of old songs that made Caleb's ears ring and his vision blur. Lena screamed, clutching her head, and Caleb dragged her outside, dialing 911 as the music followed them. Louder, impossible. The police found nothing when they arrived. The radios were gone, the house pristine, as if nothing had happened. But Caleb and Lena knew better. They moved out the next week, leaving the house to rot. The last time Caleb drove by, he swore he saw a figure in the upstairs window, holding a radio, its dial spinning slowly as "Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf" drifted faintly through the air. But the story didn't end there. Weeks later, settled in a cramped apartment in Savannah, Caleb started hearing the music again. It was faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the city, but it grew louder each night. Lena didn't hear it, and Caleb didn't tell her. He couldn't bear to see her break again. He started researching the woods, digging through old records and newspaper archives. He found mentions of the estate Ruth had described, owned by a family named Hargrove. They'd been wealthy, reclusive, known for hosting lavish parties where a gramophone played endlessly. Then one night in 1937, they vanished. The official report said they'd left town, but locals claimed the woods had taken them. Caleb tracked down a retired sheriff, Tom Hargrove, a distant relative of the family. Tom was in his 80s, his hands gnarled and his eyes clouded, but he spoke with a clarity that chilled Caleb. "The Hargroves didn't leave," he said. "They're still there, in the woods. They made a deal, you see. Something in those trees wanted their music, their joy, and they gave it. But it wasn't enough. It's never enough." Caleb pressed for more, but Tom clammed up, muttering about keeping the songs playing. That night, Caleb dreamed of the woods, of figures with no faces dancing to a warped melody, their hands reaching for him. He woke to the sound of "Tiptoe Through the Tulips," playing softly from his phone. Though no app was open, he smashed the phone, but the music didn't stop. They moved again, this time to Atlanta, but the music followed. It was in the hum of the refrigerator, the static of the TV, the wind outside their window. Lena started hearing it too, her screams waking Caleb in the night. They stopped sleeping, stopped talking, their marriage fraying under the weight of the sound. Caleb bought earplugs, white noise machines, anything to drown it out, but nothing worked. The music was inside them now, a parasite burrowing deeper with every note. One night, Caleb found Lena standing in the kitchen, staring at a radio that hadn't been there before. Its dial spun slowly, playing, "I'll Be Seeing You." She turned to him, her eyes empty, and whispered, "They want us to join them." Before he could stop her, she walked out the door barefoot toward the nearest patch of trees. Caleb followed, screaming her name, but the woods swallowed her whole. He searched for hours, but there was no trace, just the faint sound of music drifting on the wind. Now Caleb lives alone, in a studio apartment with no windows. He doesn't sleep, doesn't leave the house. The music is quieter now, but it's always there, a whisper in the walls. Sometimes he sees figures outside, standing just beyond the streetlights, their heads tilted as if listening. He knows they're waiting, knows the woods are calling, and every night as he lies awake, he wonders how long he can resist before he joins Lena, dancing to the endless, hungry song. Story 2. The intruder in the night. Evan Carter had spent 28 years under the creaking roof of his parents' house, where the endless shuffle of his father's insomnia kept him awake most nights. The man was a chronic night wanderer, pacing the stairs for water or the bathroom, his footsteps a rhythm Evan knew by heart. So when Evan finally bought his own place, a modest 2-story home in a quiet suburb 30 minutes from his childhood home, it was supposed to be his sanctuary, a place of silence and control. The house wasn't much to look at, a small unfinished basement with a laundry and boiler room, a first floor with a living room, kitchen, bathroom and dining area, and an upstairs with 3 bedrooms, one converted into an office, another a gym. But it was his, and that was everything, or so he thought, until the night the footsteps returned, and his dream of freedom became a waking nightmare. The first week was a blur of moving boxes and furniture, with Evan's dad, Tom, hauling in heavy pieces and offering unsolicited advice on decorating. Evan relished the quiet nights, a stark contrast to the constant creaks and clinks of his parents' place. As a light sleeper, he'd always been hyper-aware of sounds, so the stillness of his new home was a blessing. He spent his days settling in, hanging photos, and arranging his office, a space where he could finally focus on his freelance graphic design work without interruption. But by the seventh night, a Sunday in July 2022, the peace shattered. Evan had been struggling to sleep, his mind buzzing with the excitement and stress of the move. He took a melatonin and a sleeping pill, a combination that usually knocked him out cold. Within an hour, he was out, dreaming of endless staircases and shadowy rooms. But sometime after midnight, a sound yanked him from sleep. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, climbing the stairs. They were familiar, the same heavy tread he'd grown up with, and in his groggy haze, he mumbled, "Dad?" assuming his father had stopped by unannounced. The fog of sleep cleared, and reality hit like a sledgehammer. His dad wasn't here. Evan lived alone. His heart pounded, a frantic rhythm against his ribs, as he sat up in bed, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped, leaving a silence that was worse than any noise, thick with the weight of something watching. He grabbed his phone and a flashlight from the nightstand, his bare feet silent on the carpet as he crept to the door. "Dad?" he called again, his voice cracking, half expecting a response despite knowing it was impossible. The house answered with nothing but stillness. Evan flicked on the hallway light, then the office, the gym, the bathroom, bathing the upstairs in a harsh glow. He stood at the top of the stairs, peering down into the dark living room below. The shadows seemed to pulse, alive with something he couldn't name. And then he saw it, a tall figure at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at him. The man wore a black ski mask, his eyes glinting like a predator's in the dim light. He was motionless, his head tilted slightly, as if studying Evan. The air felt charged, heavy with an unspoken threat. Evan's voice broke as he screamed, "Get the expletive out of my house!" His hands shook, the flashlight beam jittering across the figure. To his shock, the man turned and walked out the front door, his movements calm, almost leisurely, as if he had all the time in the world. Evan ran downstairs, his bare feet slipping on the hardwood, and locked the door, dropping the keys twice in his panic. His breath came in ragged gasps, his mind racing. Had he imagined it? Was it over? Then he heard it, the back door slamming shut with a force that rattled the walls. There was another intruder. Evan's knees buckled as he realized he'd been so focused on the man at the stairs that he hadn't noticed someone else in the house. He grabbed his phone and dialed his dad, who answered immediately, his voice sharp with concern. "Why the hell aren't you calling the cops?" Tom snapped, his insomnia a blessing for once. Evan hung up and dialed 911, his voice trembling as he explained the situation to the operator, his eyes darting to every shadow, expecting another figure to emerge. The police arrived within 15 minutes, their flashlights sweeping the house and yard. Evan described the man in the mask, tall, lean, no visible weapons, but admitted he hadn't seen the second intruder. The officers found a kitchen window slightly ajar, just wide enough for someone to slip through. They dusted for prints but found nothing useful. "Could be a random break-in," one officer said, his tone skeptical. "Kids, maybe, or someone looking for an easy score." They left, advising Evan to install better locks and a security system, but their words did little to ease the violation that clung to him like damp cloth. Sleep was impossible after that. Evan spent the night on the couch, a kitchen knife clutched in his hand, jumping at every creak. The next day, he installed deadbolts on every door and a basic alarm system, but the sense of violation lingered. He started noticing things, small things at first. A chair in the dining room slightly askew, a glass in the sink he didn't remember using, a faint smudge on the basement door. He told himself it was paranoia, his light sleeper brain amplifying every detail, but deep down, he knew better. The footsteps returned the next night, softer this time, almost cautious, moving through the first floor. Evan didn't call out. He grabbed the knife and crept to the top of the stairs, his phone recording in case he needed evidence. The living room was dark, but he saw a shadow move, a figure not at the stairs but near the kitchen. It paused as if sensing him, then vanished out the back door. When Evan checked, the door was locked, but a faint scratch mark marred the frame, as if someone had tried to pry it open. He called the police again, but they found no signs of forced entry, and their skepticism was palpable now, their eyes suggesting he was jumping at shadows. Evan's world began to unravel. He stopped sleeping, his days blurring into nights spent staring at the ceiling, the knife never leaving his side. The house, once a symbol of freedom, felt like a trap. He started hearing whispers, faint and unintelligible, coming from the basement. At first, he thought it was the boiler, but one night he recorded it, the audio capturing a chilling phrase. "He's awake." The voice was low, almost inhuman, and it sent him spiraling. He moved back in with his parents the next day, leaving the house empty, but the whispers followed him in his dreams, a constant murmur that kept him awake. Desperate for answers, Evan hired a private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop named Ray who specialized in weird cases. Ray found no record of recent break-ins in the area, but uncovered something unsettling. The previous owner, a recluse named Harold Vance, had died in the house 5 years earlier under mysterious circumstances. The official report said natural causes, a heart attack, but neighbors whispered about strange noises, lights flickering in the windows long after the house was supposed to be empty. Ray dug deeper, finding police reports from the 90s about a series of break-ins in the neighborhood, all linked to a figure in a black mask who never stole anything, just watched. Evan's fear turned to obsession. He returned to the house, installing cameras in every room, their red lights blinking like eyes in the dark. The footage showed nothing for days, just empty rooms and the hum of the air conditioner. But one night his phone buzzed with a motion alert. The living room camera showed a figure, the same masked man, standing in the center of the room, staring directly at the lens. His head tilted, as if he knew Evan was watching. The feed cut out for a single frame, then resumed with the room empty. Evan played it back, frame by frame, and noticed something else, a second shadow just out of frame, as if someone else was there, unseen. He called Ray, who suggested setting up a sting. "If this guy's coming back, we'll catch him," Ray said, his voice gruff but confident. They spent the next night in the house, hidden in the upstairs office with the lights off, watching the camera feeds on Ray's laptop. The house was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the cameras. Then at 2:17 a.m., the footsteps returned, not on the stairs but in the basement. They were slow, deliberate, moving toward the stairs that led to the first floor. Evan's heart raced as he gripped the knife, his palms slick with sweat. Ray motioned for silence, his own hand on a taser. The basement door creaked open, and the footsteps ascended, stopping just outside the living room. The camera feed flickered, then went black. When it returned, the masked man was there again, standing in the same spot, staring at the camera. But this time, he wasn't alone. A second figure, shorter and cloaked in shadow, stood behind him, its head bowed. The air grew heavy, the temperature dropping despite the summer heat. Ray whispered, "Stay here," and crept downstairs, taser in hand. Evan watched the feed, his breath shallow as Ray approached the living room. The masked man turned, his eyes locking onto Ray through the camera, and then the feed cut out again. A scream echoed through the house, Ray's voice raw with pain. Evan bolted downstairs, knife raised, but the living room was empty. Ray was gone, the back door wide open, a faint trail of blood leading into the yard. Evan called the police, his voice hoarse with panic. They searched the house and the surrounding area but found no trace of Ray or the intruders. The blood trail ended at the edge of the property, as if Ray had vanished into thin air. The police took Evan's statement, but their questions were sharp, almost accusatory, as if he'd made it all up. They found no evidence on the cameras. The footage from that night was corrupted, showing only static. Evan never returned to the house. He sold it at a loss, moving into a small apartment in the city. But the footsteps followed him. They were faint at first, barely audible over the hum of traffic, but they grew louder each night, always coming from below, as if the basement had followed him. He started seeing the masked man in his dreams, standing at the foot of his bed, his eyes glinting through the holes in the mask. Sometimes there was a second figure, its face obscured, whispering words Evan couldn't understand. He tracked down the neighbors who'd mentioned Harold Vance, hoping for answers. One, an elderly woman named Clara, told him a story that chilled him. Harold wasn't alone when he died, she said, her voice low. He had a brother, Victor, who lived with him. They were strange, kept to themselves, always watching the neighborhood. After Harold died, Victor disappeared, but folks said they saw him at night, wearing a mask, standing in people's yards. Some thought he was looking for Harold, like he didn't believe he was gone. Evan's blood ran cold. What happened to Victor? Clara shook her head. No one knows, but the house, it's not right. Things stay there, even when they're gone. Now Evan lives in a studio apartment with no windows, the knife always within reach. He doesn't sleep, doesn't leave unless he has to. The footsteps are quieter now, but they're always there, a reminder of the house he can't escape. Sometimes he sees shadows outside, two figures standing just beyond the streetlights, their heads tilted as if waiting. He knows they're watching, knows they're not done. And every night, as he lies awake, he hears the whispers again. He's awake. He wonders how long he can hold out before they come for him, too. Story 3. The Watcher. Across the canal, Mason Reed had always dreamed of owning a waterfront home, a place where he could dock his boat and watch the sun set over the canal, the water glinting like molten gold. When he found the 2-story house in a quiet Florida suburb, it felt like fate. The property was perfect, a private dock, a spacious backyard, and neighbors who greeted him with casseroles and warm smiles. But across the canal, a dilapidated house loomed, its peeling paint and overgrown weeds a stark contrast to the idyllic scene. From the moment Mason moved in, that house cast a shadow over his dream, its dark windows watching him like empty eyes. The first 2 weeks were a whirlwind of settling in. Mason spent his days unpacking, arranging furniture, and taking his boat out for test runs. The canal was his playground, a narrow ribbon of water flanked by manicured lawns and palm trees. His neighbors were friendly, stopping by to introduce themselves and share stories about the neighborhood. But the house across the canal was a mystery. Its shutters were warped, its roof sagging, and every night, when Mason glanced out his bedroom window before bed, it was pitch black, its windows swallowing the moonlight. He assumed it was a second home, maybe owned by snowbirds who only visited in winter. Still, something about its silence unnerved him, like a void waiting to be filled. The trouble started on the night he and his brother Dylan launched his boat into the canal. It was a humid July evening, the air thick with the scent of salt and mangroves. They'd spent hours getting the boat secured to the dock, laughing and cracking beers as the sun dipped below the horizon. Exhausted, Mason headed upstairs to his bedroom, ready to collapse. As he reached to close the blinds, he froze. A single light glowed in the house across the canal, a sickly yellow that seemed to pulse in the darkness. In the illuminated window, a man stood, staring out. He was older, maybe 50, with grayish hair and a lean frame, dressed in sweatpants and a long-sleeve shirt. His posture was rigid, his head tilted slightly, as if studying something in the distance. Mason's breath caught. Was the man looking at him? The canal was only 30 feet wide, close enough to make out details, but the man's face was unreadable, his eyes hidden in shadow. Mason told himself he was just gazing into the night, maybe admiring the water, but the intensity of his stare sent a chill down Mason's spine. He slammed the blinds shut and tried to shake it off, but sleep didn't come easily that night. The next day, while planting grass seed in his backyard, Mason felt it again, the weight of being watched. He looked up, and there was the man, standing at his back door, his eyes locked on Mason. Their gazes met, and Mason's stomach twisted. The man didn't wave, didn't move, just stared, his expression blank but heavy with intent. Mason looked away, pretending to focus on his work, but the man's presence was a physical pressure, like a hand on his shoulder. He tried to ignore it, scattering seed with shaking hands. But when he glanced back, the man was still there, unmoving, a statue carved from malice. The encounters became a nightly ritual. Every evening, as Mason closed his blinds, the man was there, standing at his window or door, watching. Sometimes he was in the living room, sometimes upstairs, but always facing Mason's house. The canal offered no barrier, its calm waters reflecting the man's silhouette like a dark mirror. Mason started avoiding his backyard, sticking to the front of the house where the neighbors' lights felt safer. But even inside, he felt exposed, the canal a window to whatever lived across the water. His friends noticed his unease when they came over to take the boat out. "You okay, man?" Dylan asked, cracking a joke about Mason's haunted house vibes. Mason laughed it off, not wanting to sound paranoid, but he couldn't stop checking the house across the canal. Every glance confirmed the man was there, watching, his presence a constant reminder that Mason wasn't alone. He started closing the blinds before sunset, locking every door, checking the windows twice. But the man's gaze seemed to penetrate the walls, a silent intrusion that left Mason's skin crawling. One night, desperate to understand, Mason tested the man. He turned off his bedroom lamp and stood by the window, peering through the blinds. The man was there, standing at his back door, his silhouette sharp against the dim light. Mason waited, his breath shallow, for 3 minutes, then 5, then 10. The man didn't move, didn't blink, his head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. It was unnatural, like he wasn't human, but a thing pretending to be. Mason's heart pounded as he shut the blinds, vowing to ignore the house from then on. He told himself it was just a creepy neighbor, maybe a recluse who didn't know how to interact. But deep down, he knew it was more. That same night, as he lay in bed drifting toward sleep, he heard footsteps on his deck. The wooden boards creaked under a slow, deliberate weight, each step echoing like a heartbeat. Mason's eyes snapped open, his pulse racing. He crept to the window, careful not to disturb the blinds, but the angle was wrong. He couldn't see the deck from upstairs. He grabbed his phone, ready to dial 911, when a deafening crash shattered the silence. Glass exploded somewhere downstairs, the sound so sharp it felt like a physical blow. Mason bolted to the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the counter and his phone. The back window was gone, shards scattered across the hardwood like a frozen rain. A single brick lay in the wreckage, its edges worn but heavy, as if it had been plucked from a forgotten place. Mason's hands shook as he turned on the deck light, expecting to see the man from across the canal. The yard was empty, the canal still, but the darkness beyond felt alive, watching. He called 911, his voice hoarse as he explained the situation, his eyes darting to every shadow, expecting a figure to emerge. The police arrived quickly, their flashlights sweeping the house and yard. Mason showed them the brick and the broken window, his words tumbling out as he described the man across the canal. His constant staring, his suspicion that he was responsible. The officers took the brick as evidence and promised to check the house across the water. Mason waited, his heart in his throat as they drove around the canal. When they returned, their faces were grim. "No one lives there," one officer said. "The place has been foreclosed for months. The previous tenant was evicted last fall. A neighbor saw us knocking and confirmed it's been empty." Mason's blood ran cold. "But I saw him," he insisted. "Every night, he's there, watching me." The officers exchanged a look, their skepticism palpable. They suggested installing cameras and promised to patrol the area, but their words did little to ease the dread coiling in Mason's chest. He installed doorbell cameras the next day, front and back, their motion sensors linked to his phone. That morning, driven by a mix of fear and defiance, he crossed the canal to the house. The front door was locked, the windows boarded, but the back door swung open with a creak that echoed in the still air. Inside, the house was a tomb, dust-covered floors, cobwebs in the corners, the air stale with neglect. Mason took 2 steps inside, his flashlight beam trembling, when a sound from upstairs froze him, a low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat. He ran, not looking back, and locked himself in his house. The cameras caught nothing for days, but Mason's unease grew. He stopped going outside after dark, kept the blinds shut, and slept with the knife close. Then one night, his phone buzzed with a motion alert. The footage showed the man standing on his dock, staring at the house. His face was clearer now, pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow, like sockets in a skull. The video cut out for a second, then resumed with the dock empty. Mason played it back, frame by frame, and noticed something. A faint reflection in the water, Not of one man, but two, their silhouettes distorted, as if the canal itself was lying. He called the police again, but they found no trace of anyone. The house across the canal remained dark, its windows like voids. Mason considered moving, but the house was his dream, his investment. He stayed, but the watching never stopped. The thumping sound returned, not from across the canal, but from his own attic, a slow, deliberate pulse that kept him awake. Every morning he found a single brick on his doorstep, no matter how many times he threw them into the canal. The water seemed to reject them, spitting them back onto the shore. Desperate, Mason contacted a local historian, Ellen Marsh, who knew the area's secrets. She was in her 70s, her eyes sharp despite her frail frame. When he described the man and the bricks, her face paled. "That house," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "belonged to a man named Elias Crow. He was a recluse, lived there alone after his wife died in the 80s. They said he went mad, started seeing things in the canal, faces, hands, things that weren't there. He'd stand at his window watching the water, talking to it. One night he disappeared. They found his boat drifting in the canal, empty, with a brick tied to the anchor." Mason's stomach dropped. "What happened to him?" Ellen shook her head. "No one knows, but folks say the canal's not right. It holds on to things, people, memories, grudges, and it doesn't let go." That night, Mason dreamed of the canal, its waters black and endless, hands reaching up from the depths. He woke to the thumping, louder now, coming from the walls. The cameras showed nothing, but when he checked the footage, he saw it, a shadow in the attic, moving in time with the sound. He called Dylan, who came over with a baseball bat, ready to confront whatever was up there. They climbed the attic stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The space was empty, but the thumping stopped, replaced by a low hum, like water lapping at a shore. They found nothing, but the next morning another brick was on the doorstep, this one etched with a symbol, a crude eye carved deep into the stone. Mason's hands shook as he threw it into the canal, watching it sink. That night the thumping returned, accompanied by a new sound, scratching, like nails on wood, coming from the walls. He stopped sleeping, his days blurring into nights spent watching the camera feeds, waiting for the man to return. One night, the cameras caught something new. The man was back, standing on the dock, but this time he wasn't alone. A second figure stood beside him, its face obscured, its body unnaturally still. The canal reflected them, but the water showed more. Dozens of shapes, pale and writhing, just below the surface. Mason's heart stopped as the man raised a hand, pointing at the house. The footage cut out, and when it resumed, the dock was empty, but the scratching in the walls grew louder, frantic. Mason called the police, but they found nothing, no footprints, no signs of tampering. The officer suggested he was stressed, maybe imagining things, but Mason knew better. He hired a private investigator, a woman named Carla who specialized in paranormal cases. She set up equipment in the house, EMF meters, thermal cameras, audio recorders. The first night, the meters spiked, the air growing heavy with static. Carla's face was grim as she played back the audio, a chorus of whispers all saying, "He sees you." Carla dug into the house's history, uncovering more about Elias Crow. He'd been a fisherman, obsessed with the canal, claiming it spoke to him. After his wife's death, he'd started collecting bricks, stacking them in his yard, saying they were offerings to keep the water happy. When he vanished, the bricks disappeared too, but locals reported seeing them reappear, always on doorsteps, always marked with that same eye symbol. Mason couldn't take it anymore. He put the house up for sale, staying with Dylan while it was on the market. But the disturbances followed. Bricks appeared outside Dylan's apartment, each with the eye symbol, and the scratching sounds woke Mason at night, now coming from the ceiling. He started seeing the man in his dreams, standing in the canal, his face no longer human but a mass of writhing shadows. The water around him pulsed, alive, calling Mason's name. One night, Mason woke to find his bedroom window open, the blinds swaying. A brick sat on the sill, its eye symbol glowing faintly in the moonlight. He grabbed it, ready to hurl it away, when he heard the hum again, louder, coming from outside. He looked out and saw the man, standing in the canal, waist deep in water that shouldn't have been that deep. His eyes were gone, replaced by black voids, and he was smiling. Behind him, the water churned, hands breaking the surface, reaching for Mason. He ran, leaving everything behind, moving to a new city, a new life. But the canal followed. Every body of water, puddles, rivers, even the glass of water on his nightstand, reflected the man, his void eyes watching. The bricks kept appearing no matter where he went, always marked with the eye. And every night, the scratching grew louder, closer, until Mason realized it wasn't in the walls anymore. It was inside him, a rhythm that matched his heartbeat, a reminder that the canal was hungry and it had chosen him.